Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Um, Hi. Just going to introduce us. We're going to have a bit of a conversation together today that I hope is going to be meaningful, impactful to some of the folk that are going to watch this. My name's Lara Gregory. I'm a sex and relationship coach. I work with adults around how your relationship to your body, to your sexuality impacts your life, so how it can shape and change your life. I say that different ways every time I describe it because I feel like there's about 600 different ways I could describe my work. So that's how I'm sharing it today. And I'm here with Maita Davyduik, and I understand that there's an enunciation of his last name that my mouth couldn't quite get around, so we're going to go with the anglicized version of it. Maita and I actually know each other from way back. We used to work together in a completely different lifetime. But now he's here chatting with us because Maita works with men around how masculinity shapes men's lives. And he's just here to share a bit of his story. I'm probably going to ask a few questions and just wanting to create some, I guess, some storytelling that is going to support men is essentially what I'm hoping will come out of this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So,
Yay.
Maita, welcome and thank you.
Yeah. We've who knew we'd both be here, 10 plus years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 plus, you're right. It is that long.
It's a long time ago, yeah. It's a while. I've got gray eyelashes or a gray eyebrow. So
That you didn't have those before?
no, I didn't.
No, I just remember you coming into the workplace with as a bundle of energy. That's what I remember. And people really liked you. Those are the two things I remember. Like,
full of piss and vinegar, yeah.
and and the team loved you. So
yeah, it was a great time actually. I really loved that. So so I guess I can talk a little bit about what I like my life.
Yeah,
and
please do.
how, and how I am doing what I'm doing now. So I'll just set that context. Like right now, I do one-on-one work with men. It's like it's guidance counseling, it's coaching, it's mentoring, it's really just supporting men to look at how to build like a capacity around emotional regulation, nervous system regulation, and expression, and really looking at also like how having healthy relationships is just really important to mental health. And so, and one of the contexts in which I view that work through is looking at masculinity, or like how we've been socialized as men. So the social patterns that lead to some of these challenges that men have, like around isolation, or a lack of intimacy, or an inability to express their emotions, or a feeling of being alone when they're surrounded by other people, is like a really common one, or like the lone wolf kind of. So like these like really kind of common social patterns that we have around masculinity. Also do like work around sexualized violence and that as well. So like looking at some of the like, things that also impact our community from that perspective, both on men and then on people that are hurt by men's violence as well. So we can kind of link up both. I got into, so I left Calgary and I was pretty unhappy with my relationships with my male friends.
Mm-hmm.
I was like really depressed. I was pretty lonely, and I had no understanding or context for mental health or anything back then. And I'm not sure how I got onto it, but I got into like the kind of mythopoetic men's movement route, which is like Robert Bly and Sam Keen, and like there's a whole era, and I mean they're still around, and they call it the mythopoetic men's movement. There's things that I really like about it, that movement. There's things that I don't love about it.
Did you say mythopoetic?
Mythopoetic, yeah. Yeah, they've mythologized.
If someone wants to look it up, then they can.
Yeah, they've like mythologized men's work. So anyways, that was like in my early 20s. And I read this book called Iron John. And it was the first time I'd ever read a book about masculinity, or that like asked me to like critically look at how I'd been socialized as a man, and or a boy, I should say. And yeah, it was like, it cracked a lot of things open for me. And then I met someone who was like, hey, I know some guys that you probably really like, because I was getting pretty excited about like men's work and mentoring. So those guys, like, I met them at like this gathering, random gathering, and they were like, hey, come with us. We're going to a men's group. And I got like shuttled off with these strange guys into the forest, in this little tiny church in the forest. And it was super weird and awesome. It turned out to be like amazing, and really was the first time that I was brought into a circle of men that were really loving and caring, and they were making an effort, you know, they weren't perfect at it, but they were certainly making an effort at being more loving men. And I think that at that point I felt pretty estranged from other men, because I often expressed a lot more than some men would, and I knew that, I was pretty vividly aware that I had to hide that, especially in Alberta. Like, it was not something, you know, the whole hearts on your sleeve wasn't something that you did in Alberta, right? So,
right.
So
probably wasn't necessarily safe to be that way there.
Oh no, it wasn't safe at all. And that was my experience with men up until that point. Was like I had to run from men, or hide from men, or evade violence or whatever, or be part of the the violence in order to survive, right?
Right, or join in. Yeah,
exactly, right. So so that was like, so this was like, so I actually had moved to BC at this point, so that's where I started tapping into some of the men's work, and that was through the Mankind Project, which still exists. They do rites of passage and initiation stuff with men, and I'm not I really like it for myself. I don't recommend it for everyone, but it's a great, definitely, they're doing some cool work.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Just going back to Alberta a bit for a moment before you moved here. Were you aware that things were kind of not quite working for you, or is that upon reflection? I'm just curious.
I mean, yeah, like I was like, I remember being aware of like wanting better friendships with men.
Okay.
I was like, these friendships suck. Like, all we do is pick on each other, and all we do is get mean with each other. And I was like, this is not. And that's actually a part of what, has been a big journey for me, is like looking at like that, what does that even mean to have friendship, And so when I came to BC after that, I developed more friendships with more men that were more intimate and caring and connected, and so it became actually the basis of the inspiration for a group that I developed later on called Toolkit for Friendship, which I still run. But I developed that through a counseling center, and it was looking at like friendship, because we realized that lots and lots and lots of men struggle to have like healthy male friendships. So
it's commonplace out in our community.
It's very common for men to struggle with that. And so that was like I would say I've always been kind of reflective, like had some level of what some people call self-reflexivity, like to be able to think about my life and go, oh, maybe I should change that, So that was definitely there, and I didn't have a framework for understanding that at all. So from there, I got involved pretty for a while with the Mankind Project, for quite a while, on and off over the years. I'm still loosely involved, but there's like a lot of things that came up for me as I went around and looked at men's work. Like, I was quite critical like there was aspects that I was critical of that didn't really work for me. Like there's in the mythopoetic men's movement, there's like a lot of things around appropriation and
Got it. Yeah.
some like kind of old school like therapeutic stuff that I believe can be really dysregulating for the nervous system and that aren't necessarily always great in the long term, but may feel really good in the short term. These are just kind of my personal beliefs on it. They're not necessarily like entirely based. Some people might disagree with them. That's okay. And so I went and I did like I went and checked out a lot of men's groups, from like pro-feminist men's groups to these mythopoetic men's groups, checked out some of the Sterling stuff, and I just like was kind of like, and I was in my early 20s and I was like, okay, I could go like have these groups with all these like old guys who got this way, or I could like start to look at like, what do I need, like as a, in my mid 20s, or my early 30s, like what do I need from this place? And so, what I realized for myself was that at a real baseline, the thing that I wasn't really learning was like how to regulate my nervous system. And so for me, as someone who's also got ADHD, which is like literally a nervous system dysregulation disorder, my focus kind of started to turn in that way. And that through, for about 10 years now, I've had a Tai Chi practice. And I would say for 5 of them, I've been really, really dedicated. And so that's been a really big part of that journey as well, is like learning how to regulate my body, my nervous system, my emotions, and then attuning myself to those things. And that's been really hard. And so even as someone who's considered kind of expressive for a guy, I have still really struggled with feeling safe and grounded and regulated in my expressions, right? And particularly when it came to like anger, or and like, because that can be really dysregulating for everybody, but we don't have a lot of healthy examples of that. And so, that's been over the years, it's kind of been mixing that work. So the work looking at kind of the nervous system and then masculinity, and then the masculinity piece, I've worked with some groups around sexualized violence and gender, and kind of like, I feel like feminism has like a really great like critical analysis of gender, and so I often use that. I don't really have a feminist flag that I carry around with me, but I think that feminism has done and that women have been doing a lot of amazing work around exploring the impacts of like being socialized in a very particular way, right? And so so I've kind of taken that and I've weaved that in with kind of the nervous system work, because I really believe, from what I've experienced, is that I can know all these things. I can go out and read a bunch of books about masculinity. I can pull these books off the shelf here and put them in my brain, and then it doesn't matter. Like, it matters, but like what matters is that there is this nervous system that goes from my brain, polyvagal system, all the way through my body, down my spine and into my organs, and that is like also connected into like our social system. And so we need to learn how to regulate that, because in masculinity, it has literally shaped this thing in our body like a muscle, right? Like a muscle.
Right.
And so, and I've seen it time and time again, that if I can get men into a regulated state of being, then they naturally start to move towards some of these things that they don't necessarily have in their life, like, emotional expression, or being vulnerable, or being curious and expressing curiosity about other people, so like empathy, my experience has been that it always comes back to the body, and that I, including myself, have been this person who has operated from here all the time, and it's like, and I'm a thinker, so it's easy for me to do. But how do I drop down into my body, you know, and and so the nervous system has to be regulated.
Yeah.
Right. In order to do that. Yeah.
Am I hearing you correctly? It sounds like, so I'm just going to backtrack a little bit and then come back to your point. You experienced a whole bunch of different ways of doing men's work. Sounds like you took what worked for you or what landed.
Yeah.
And a bunch you left behind, which is totally what I think most of us would recommend someone does when they go with those experiences. And then it sounds like a combination of that, along with your own personal learning as a human being who lives with ADHD.
Yeah.
Is that what sort of spearheaded the getting the curiosity about the nervous system stuff?
I mean, did it? I don't know if it spearheaded
not necessarily related. Yeah.
But I think actually, like, my research, like when I started looking at trauma, so like when I first got introduced, you know, like Waking the Tiger Within and Peter Levine, like, and that was like actually quite a long time ago that I got introduced to that stuff.
Okay.
Kind of before it was like a real big popular thing.
Yeah.
And so I've been kind of like looking at that, because what I noticed in a lot of men's work is that men weren't coming back, right? And I was like, why aren't they coming back? Like, what is it about the men's movement that doesn't keep men around, you know, that isn't like building, right? Until Me Too hit, and then men were like, oh my God, I need a men's group.
Right.
You know, they're like,
big impact.
Me, I need a men's group.
And then I think I was also hearing what you're saying. I think I heard this, that most men are walking around pretty unregulated, nervous system wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think people in general are, and I think that men are not, like, I talk about it as capacity. So it's like, if you haven't been taught to share your emotions, and you haven't been taught to express your emotions, then you have a lower capacity, right? You literally haven't been practicing these things. Whereas, like, if you're socialized as a woman, you, in the least, you have a network of other women that you can do that in a safe way, ideally, right? Like, I mean, not all women do, but generally speaking, you know, women will pick up the phone and, you know, call a friend when they're having a hard time. Men don't do that. That is like death to men, you know? It's like crazy. I've spent so much time, like, you know, so depressed, and, you know, like, my best friend upstairs above me, and I would not pick up the phone and call him and be like, hey, I'm having a hard time, right? It's like that is like,
it would never occur to you to
tragically
do that.
Different.
Yeah.
Well, even if it occurred, you wouldn't do it. I think it actually occurs to men all the time. I think they just don't do it because it's so ingrained, right? And so really it's about building a capacity to have these, to be able to express ourselves, to be able to regulate ourselves. So I think we're further, and, you know, all the research shows, maybe not all the research, but there's lots of research that shows that male babies are more expressive as babies than female babies. It's by a small margin. So our physiology and then how we've been socialized are actually contrary. And so if you look at that, it's like, okay, maybe we just need to practice. So I really advocate.
We just need to bring it out.
Yeah, I really advocate for practicing regularly, like having a weekly group, having weekly counseling, having, you know, these weekly places where you go and you practice building your capacity to be in healthy relationship, right? Which is, you know, expression is a part of that. So yeah.
Okay. And then you said something, I heard you describe, you noticed that in some of the work you've done, or over the period of time of the work you've done, when men, I think you said when you supported men to get kind of regulated and in their body, they were, you observed a natural movement towards connection, communication, feelings.
Yeah,
did I understand? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like at a real baseline, like I played around with it a bit, where like I've like introduced all the teaching concepts and been like, express curiosity and, you know, ask each other questions, which is like it's 101, right? And it's like, and so I've done that where I've like been like a total like lead, where I've been like, I will lead all of this. And then I've
Right.
also done it where I step back. And what I've noticed is that when I step back, people naturally do the things that I'm like advocating for, right? Which if you look at like states of regulation, you know, when the nervous system is regulated, it is, you know, social engagement, right? And all of those things are listed under social engagement. So like one of those things being expressing curiosity about other human beings, right? And so when we're dysregulated, we tend to be focused on ourselves, right? So
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hear lots of it. Yeah, and I'm hearing like there's a whole whack of evidence that you've both read and experienced that what men might identify as missing and are seeking is actually like it's already there. It just needs practice.
Yeah, it's
support.
in your brain. It's in your brain and your nervous system.
Yeah.
It is like our human. It is our innate. It's an innate human quality, right? Like it's in our physiology. Like we are built to be relational creatures, so it's in our physiology. And so I actually think that a lot of what men are experiencing has to do with like the mirror neuron. And so when you get someone in a group, if you get like some alpha guy who's like kind of rousing the group, people are going to start to express in that way, right? But if you get someone who walks in and starts being vulnerable and is like confident in their vulnerability, which is what I tend to do in group work, I tend to be that like kind of first step, you know, or I will often identify someone that has that, and then I'll get them to take that step. And then what happens is when other men start to see that, they start to go, oh, whoa, male culture can be safe. That's cool. Maybe I can start talking about my feelings. Maybe I'm not going to get punched. Maybe it's totally safe, right? Because my experience has been that men either, as a response to like violence in male culture, we either inflate ourselves or we deflate ourselves. So, you know, so we become that like, you know, kind of more kind of ego-centric kind of big guy that, you know, fluffs themselves up, or we become like small and we like hang back and we don't want to be seen and we try to avoid the violence, right? And so men tend to fluctuate between those.
Yes. And I observe that in male friends. Like now, hearing you say that exact, I can think of exact life situation in which one male friend did the deflating and the other one did the like in the same interaction. It was like I could watch it happen. Yeah.
Yeah, Terrence Real in his book, he really talks about them a bit different, but these are his books there.
Okay.
I really love his work.
Terrence Real.
Yeah. So a lot of what I like, a lot of things, he's filled in a lot of blanks for me, but he's also he really talks about that inflation deflation thing a lot, and he talks about how in a patriarchal culture you can never win. So when our self-esteem is based on like getting up the hierarchy, it's like you can actually never win that game because there's always someone who's better than you in some way, shape, or form. And so really, like in my judgment, this work is like, this is actually undoing kind of the patriarchal conditioning in our bodies, right? And so, and I mean, I don't think that all of those things are bad either. I think that there's things that are beneficial within masculinity, and that we've
absolutely. Yeah, it's not all
stuff. So yeah, and I get reminded of that by men all the time. They're like, yeah, but there's these great things too, you know. And so, you know, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I can see how it's benefited me in other areas of my life, like so yeah. I think I lost track of my
That's okay. I was just actually going to share a couple like comments, if that just, you don't mind.
Totally.
Take that moment. One being, in the world of coaching, or my world of coaching, we talk about survival mechanism, right, which is that learned coping mechanisms. and agreed that like as you start to unpack it all, there's an essence side to our survival mechanism. Like one of mine like lets me get shit done, right? But it also like its kind of shadow side is I'm not being or experiencing or being present. You know what I mean? I'm just doing. Like I'm masculinity and femininity, same, right? It has its kind of its beautiful side and its shadow side.
Yep.
Yeah. And it occurred to me when you said about the mirror neurons, what flashed up was because I've been a lot more conscious in my relationships and in dating, that I've really noticed men exactly. Like if I show up open hearted, curious, willing, present, he shows up on a whole other connected, communicative, gentle level with me. But when I show up in my like, I don't know, I have my own like kind of doing manicky, like not present kind of hyper side. That's what I get. Like I get back what I show up with, and it amazes me. Like I'm just like, oh my God, is this how humans work? It's like I'm actually seeing it in real time. Yeah.
And another way of it sounds like maybe thinking about that might be like when you're regulated and they're regulated, you get co-regulation, and you're like, oh, it's amazing.
And maybe me being
when
regulated,
you're dysregulated, then it's like, oh, it doesn't feel as good.
That's probably exactly what it is. And I imagine that when one of us shows up regulated and the other one's not, we might actually help the other person get closer to come into regulation potentially.
Absolutely, yeah, you can for sure. Yeah, it helps to it helps, like it's like an anchor point, right? Like, and I actually got feedback from someone once, like where they were like, wow, they were like, why weren't you freaking out? Everybody else was freaking out, and I was like, well, it's like I don't need to. Like I can just, like, conflict is not a problem. It's like this is just gonna show us something that is going to help us. And so I was able to maintain my state of regulation in that because I wasn't freaking out about the challenges that were at hand. I was just letting them kind of roll through me until it settled, right? And so I think that, and I'm not always like that. Sometimes I'm the dysregulated guy, right? So, but it can help to bring somebody in, right? And I think that's really important. I know we had talked about like kind of relationships and stuff. So I think that Terrence Real talks a lot about, he's pretty heteronormative. So if you're looking for something that's queer, it's not necessarily the best, although I think that you can apply all of his stuff to any kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Like at the core of it, I think you can apply to any relationship. But he really talks a lot about how the way in which men and women have been socialized through gender really affects them. And I noticed that in myself. And even as someone who does this work, like, it's just like, I always say, I've been saying lately, I'm like, cool, take what you expect from men and turn it down halfway, because we've literally oftentimes got 30 or 40 years of not practicing these skills, right? And I'm not saying that should be a justification for in particular violence or anything like that, but I think I think that we struggle with it in a sense that we often don't have the community resources.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like not a lot of like specific male services. And then there's, or for those who are masculine identified or whatever. And there's also not, we tend to not have as good social networks. Social networks are often, sometimes we seem like we have really solid social networks, and they're not very deep. The roots don't go very deep, and then this like kind of like dysregulation and disconnection from our bodies, right? Which, especially if you look at like working class men, there's this like really big, because our bodies are used for, building shit and digging holes, right? So I think there's this big disconnection there, and then into how we express, right? And so I think that's really like all of those things impact our ability to be in relationship. And so one of the models that I look at is what I call creating a network of care. And so that might include like you as a coach, and that might include me as a guidance counselor, and that might include the men's group that a guy is involved in, you know, and that might include their family, you know, and their doctor, and like, so, but like really getting men to start looking at like, what does your network of care look like, right? If it's just, and looking at like what relationships are really serving them and what relationships aren't, and then like how can they build up their capacity to be in healthier relationships within those networks, right? And so the way that I have chosen to do that and focus my energy is through men's groups that focus on listening, like learning listening skills that are simple listening skills, and that also witnessing skills. They're just like witnessing, like presencing, just being present with other people, and then supporting each other in the same way a coach. You know, you might get support from a coach, but like to make changes in your life. So those kind of three things are at the core of it. And then out of it, you just get through the consistency of meeting, and through the experience of coming together consistently over a long period of time with the same people, that you start to get all of these things that we often get from healthcare practitioners, that we often get from coaches, that we often get from all of these other people that provide us with what I call like relational sustenance, you know, or relationship nutrients. We start to get that from that core group, right? And so that's kind of what I'm really interested in creating and developing with men, is like these like kind of nucleuses, so that when they go back into relationship, right, their partnership, they don't come with this whole fucking bag that they dump on the table and say, here's all my childhood baggage, here's all, you know. They actually come with 30% of that, and they say, hey, look, I've been working this 70%. My community back here is helping me carry this, and I would like to, you know, do this in our relationship, right? And so, and to me, that's one of the ways I think that healthy relationship, if people are having like primary relationships or whatever, that the idea is that one person isn't like carrying all of that weight, which I think is like something that is like a real problem. And I think that I hear it from women all the time, that like, you know, I have to like do all of this for the, you know, the man that I'm with. And that's literally why I developed the Toolkit for Friendship group, was because we had female clients coming into the center being like, hey, you know, my partner needs friends. I can't help them with all their emotional stuff. Like, there needs to be another solution. And so I think that's a really big thing, is just like learning how to take care of each other in a network of social care. And it's really hard. I see guys really struggle with that. And I think at the core of it, that's what most of us struggle with, including myself. I still have to do a lot of work to maintain that network of care, you know, and I have to look. I was just meeting with the guys this morning, talking about how, you know what, in this isolation, I'm noticing that I want to withdraw and into myself, and I don't, my knee-jerk reaction is not to reach out to my friends. It's like, it's actually to go within and to isolate and lone wolf. And that's just so old and so built into me, you know, and I don't want to be seen when I'm having a hard time, when I'm tired, you know. And so I was like, I wrote out a list of people that I could reach out to this week, you know. And so that's my goal this week, and they're gonna hold me accountable to it, right? They're gonna be like, hey, did you reach out, you know? So
to create some structure to make sure you do what supports you.
Yeah. So that's why I think that, like, you know, even when we're thinking of like things like group coaching or group counseling or whatever, like a big part of what's happening there is our nervous systems are actually reorientating themselves. And so when we do that work over and over and over again, we actually build our capacity to be in relationship, right? So it's like a relationship training, when
Yeah,
we're
I
doing it
get
over
that.
and over and over. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of my own experiences. I've worked with counselors before, and at some point in my life, I've worked with I still work with coaches, but and I will go back to a counselor if I feel like it, it makes sense for me at any point. Actually, I am working with a counselor. I'm actually working with a grief counselor right now. I just remembered that.
Nice.
And yeah, it's been wonderful through hospice. But what I've noticed is in my one-to-one, because the coaching and the counseling is one-to-one. So much healing was available, absolutely, and then coaching, as is often like present to future, like
Yep.
action change things. But what I noticed was a missing for me was like, so when it comes to relationships, like particularly intimate relationships, right? I've done a lot of work around my relationships to women. I'm continuing to do lots of work around my relationships to men, because I actually used to avoid both.
Yeah.
And so my female friendships feel very different, always a work in progress, of course, because you can always get closer and closer and more greater intimacy. But what I noticed is I actually still don't know, because our culture doesn't talk about it, is what I see, what a normal messiness in relating looks like the fight or the argument, and then it gets this day that feels ugly, and how do people reconnect back, and like, because you almost get the coaching sometimes. I'm not criticizing coaching at all, because I love it and I'm a coach, but like sometimes when I read materials, it's sort of like, this is what the best version is. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, we're not going to accomplish that 90% of the time at first. And then people don't talk about their ugly part, so-called ugly part of their relationships openly. So if I'm not around, say if conflict, I do avoid at all costs, for example, like that's going to have a huge impact on an intimate relationship. But then if I never actually get to see it or play it out and practice it, and you know what I mean, and hear the stories, I think that I can see that makes such a difference, because then it's helping you translate it into real life living, everyday living.
Absolutely. Well, consistency is the most important thing.
Practice.
It's one of the most. So like I do this thing called the friendship triangle, which I've adapted from somebody else, but I think can't remember what her name is right now. But on the bottom is she had positivity. I changed it to like reciprocity. On the side, it has vulnerability. Is one side. Then the other side is consistency, and then the center is context. Right. So
context.
Cool. Like context. Like if I go to the football game with my buddy, every week, that's going to be different than if I go for a walk in the woods.
Right.
Like I'm going to get a different result. Right. So the context is going to affect how much vulnerability I have. It's going to affect my experience. Not to say that a football game is bad. You might get a lot out of going to a football game, but you're not necessarily going to get relationship work, right? So
yeah, you're not going to talk about your deepest feelings while watching the weekly football game.
Yeah, exactly. Probably. It'd be cool if you did. It'd be sweet. I might do that, but
but probably people are going to be game focused and connecting on that level, which is great, but not the same as the deep.
Yeah, exactly. And the consistency is so key, and it is so hard. It drives me nuts. It took me so long to create some consistency in my own life, and now like getting men to do that is really challenging. And I actually judge, surmise, theorize that the inconsistency is one of the things that actually stops us from going deep, and that it is also like kind of a protective mechanism, right? Like when we're dysregulated, like because we're like, well, if I have to see this person all the time, shit's gonna get real, or it's gonna cause problems, or I might start feeling things, or yada yada yada, right? So consistency is one of the key things, and it's key for the changes in the body to happen.
Yes.
Specifically, right? For those to happen, you need to get to a place of safety and regulation over and over and over. It took me a long time before I could walk into a group of men and feel safe, like feel safe in my body. And even up until 2 years ago, I went to this conference in Vancouver, and when I went in to walk into a door of this gymnasium full of men, I stopped at the door and I went, I don't know if this is safe, and that was the first time in a lot of years that I had even questioned that in my own body and being, So it lives in us, right? And we got to undo that. So that's really important.
Yeah, if you think about it, like I know one of the easy, like, I guess, metaphors to use is the whole, like, the gym metaphor of, like, if you want to build muscle, like, of course you have to do it consistently, duh, right? At least most of us recognize that. So why would it be any different around intimacy skills and communication skills and being able to have a relationship with our own emotions, never mind other people's, and regulation? Of course we've got to practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Time. Yeah.
And we have to change. We have to change our lives, right? Like, I have reorientated my entire life around nervous system regulation practices because it is what makes me a better person. You know, it makes me feel good and it makes me a nicer person to be around. And I had to reorientate and reconstruct my entire life. And that is a part of what it takes, right? A lot of people are attached to what they do. You know, and sometimes they're attached, you know, there's some good reasons to be attached to what they do. But sometimes, you know, it's about the difference between, like, not watching 3 hours of Netflix a day, or, you know, not playing video games on your phone, or just changing one of your hobbies that isn't really nourishing for you to something that is really nourishing, right? Sometimes I call them, I don't know if they use this language in your coaching stuff or other people's, but I call them, like, keystones, right? It's like having a group, having a group that is, like, teaching you how to be in a relationship is a keystone thing. It'll impact every single thing in your life. You know, your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health. It is, like, it's fundamental. So just healthy relationship systems are fundamental to our well-being, right? So
and it makes me think, when you say change your life, I flashed to a memory in somewhere in my 20s when I recognized that Cosmopolitan magazine was not good for me. And it sounds a bit silly, but, like, I remember I declared I would never read that magazine, and I haven't in 20 years, more than 20 years, because all I experienced reading it, because it was just around, right? I read it because it was there, made me feel bad about my body, and I was already struggling with that, and it made me feel like there was something wrong with everything about how I looked, dressed, lived, and, you know, because they like to give you sex tips all the time that aren't necessarily helpful, that I wasn't a good enough, like, woman / girlfriend / lover. Like, that was literally the constant messaging. And I remember I recognized that one day, and I was like, that's out of my life. It's never coming back. Like, that's just a small version, but, like, out. Yeah, just different changes like that. And then adding, as you said, adding the keystones in. It sounds like you're also the both. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? It's like getting
Still haven't read a Cosmo. I never will again. So.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I only ever saw them in the grocery lineup there. I never ventured too far into them.
Yeah, they were a big girl thing, at least when I was in the 90s. I don't know if it it's still being sold, so I'm imagining it is in some circles. Yeah.
I don't know. I almost bought a Gentleman Quarterly magazine this year because they had, like, a non-binary trans person on the front cover, and they decided to, like, shift their whole focus and into a more healthier you know, conversation around masculinity, in my judgment anyways. So
I can only speak to the one magazine.
I still didn't get it.
The rest may be great. I don't know, maybe Cosmo's changed gears since I used to look at it, but, like,
maybe you could make your own magazine now.
Yeah, right? Yeah, because all of those, as they talk about, like, I've just seen, I guess it's a meme. I don't know if I'm using the term meme correctly sometimes, but people talk about your diet is also what you read, what you look at, the social media you follow,
totally.
like the news it's not just the whole, what goes into your body and how you move your body, which is often how we think about it, but it's who we hang out with, it's who we talk to. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who
That's
we learn from.
A big thing that I explore in the Toolkit for Friendship course is, like, I look at, like, relationships that are really, like, helping you to thrive and ones that aren't, you know, and then because we get attached to, like, holding on to these relationships, whereas I'm kind of like, meh, you know what, if a friendship is, like, you know, making you feel shitty and it's not changing and you've made an effort to change it and they're not meeting you there, well, then I think it's time to move on. So I'm a big advocate for recognizing an unhealthy relationship and then you know, and then setting healthy boundaries, you know, around it, because that's actually energizing. It's like, it can be sad, but it can be
Yes.
really energizing at the same time. So to you start to, when you start to have that practice, you or at least I start to, in my life, it's been a really big lesson of like, holy crap, like somebody can take so much from me, and not be in this, in more of a reciprocal relating, right? So those boundaries are so good. Yeah.
Absolutely. I notice that a lot too. And when because I notice stuff in my energy more than anything. Like I'm talking like actual, what feels like physical energy that dumps or bottoms out a bit. Like there's usually some emotional stuckness or something, or I need to set a boundary. Those are the two most common. And that I'm ignoring or just not like taking responsibility for. And I'll set the boundary, and it's like a ricochet, like the energy just like right up, right? And the boundary can be simply as simple as me saying, hey, this thing right here is really just not working for me. And we don't even always have to do something about it. I sometimes just need to voice it. It's the voicing of it too, right? Creates lots of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it can just change it on a dime, right? It's like
and or they may not change, or the situation might not change, but I've said the thing. I've said, this is not working for me. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. And you're advocating for yourself too, which is a really good.
Yeah. Regardless of what the other person does or doesn't do in response to it, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And one of the parts of the question here that you had for me too was like, you know, how does this show up in my relationship?
Yeah. Please.
You know, in the last 2 years, it's been really cool to like play around in dating. Like I've been really, which is primarily what I've been doing, is dating. And the times where I am regulated, and like, so say someone comes to me and they're like, they've got a problem with me, like I've done something that offended them or pissed them off, or and so my practice has been to just listen and then like witness them in that, and then reflect back kind of what they're saying. I'm not great. I'm not saying I do this every single time, because sometimes I totally suck at it. And when I do that, oftentimes, you know, the problem that they had actually dissipates. Like, you know, and then we get into like a conversation of like, okay, cool, maybe I could have said that differently. Usually it's like a misunderstanding, right? Like 99% of the time it's like a misunderstanding. I kind of follow the kind of rule of thumb that like there's no right or wrong. There's our actions, and we can kind of, you know, toy them apart. Terrence Real's kind of on that wavelength as well, and that you could fight all day long about right and wrong, but really at the core of it, what we want to be is witness, and we want to be held, and we want to be understood. And sometimes that means that like I like listen to somebody and I don't actually agree with them, and it means stopping and being like, okay, cool, I'm not that guy, but like, you know, but I can still understand how you experience, you know, my behavior in that way, right? And so witness. we can hold place for those two stories, right? And that's been something that I've been really practicing, is like inviting people in my relationship into that space of like of not like being like, you're right, you're wrong. I mean, there's times when I do something that is just shitty, you know, and I can be like, you know what, that was shitty. I shouldn't have said that, and that was too far, and I can just own it. And you know, and I actually think that we can pretty much always find, both parties can find some responsibility. But I don't think we ever get to those places unless we're regulated, right? And so the listening, the witnessing, that all helps to lead to co-regulation, right? Like you can literally see it in someone when they're like going at, like they're like, no, you did this, and then you're like, oh, it sounds like you're really upset that I said that thing that you didn't like, and it embarrassed you. Okay, yeah, and then all of a sudden you see them go,
yeah,
right? And it's like a literal, it's not a figure figurative thing. It's like a literal thing that you can see in someone's body and in their being. You know, it'll go, oh, whoa, you're listening to me? And I cannot tell you how many times I have had someone tell me that I've never had someone, a man, listen to me in this way, right? Like, so it's like that makes me feel really sad, and I feel like it, you know, so it, because I think that that we just have a lot of work to do around learning how to listen better, you know.
And I think both men and women, right? If we want to be
absolutely, yeah. I don't think that, I mean, my work is primarily with men,
yes.
So I tend to speak from that place. But yeah, there's also like, my experience has also been that like a lot of women struggle with this as well. So, so we need to undo those things together, right? And really practice and take turns. And
well, and as you said, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. What's up?
Yeah, I didn't mean to actually jump in while you're still saying that. I apologize. I just was thinking that like, and then that brings me back to the idea of like the groups that you do, because we get to practice in that space versus always trying to practice when we're in the middle of the mess or the heightenedness or the emotion.
Oh, exactly.
Like that's like good luck, right? If that's the only place you're practicing. Yeah. So you can come back into that with already some practice and some new patterns maybe, and some access to a different way of being with that person.
Yeah, exactly.
In that person.
Yeah, and like undoing like, you know, hard traumatic experiences, a big part of that is staying connected to our stories and like creating, or can be a part of like creating like new stories in our lives, is like also about like slowing down and being regulated. When we're regulated in a space and things come up, because they do, like when men start working together, it's not easy. It's fucking hard, and that's why a lot of men, in my judgment, you know, avoid it. Is because it actually requires you to be doing this like to like really confronting your grief and your sadness and your anger, and then doing it in a regulated way, right? And so, and that can be challenging. It's really hard. It can be it's like tough work. And we always end up, the more time you spend with each other, the more time you start to undo and untangle those things, right? But we need to learn how to trust in that process. We need to we need to learn how to trust in our regulation. We need to learn how to trust in our own expression and rebuild that capacity in ourselves. So
that's our relationship with ourselves, and trusting ourselves. And recreating that or growing that.
Exactly, and it has definitely benefited my relationship. I feel some level of guilt about some of my relationships in the past. I feel less guilt about my relationships now. I still struggle with some things, you know. A really big theme for me has been just like, what are healthy boundaries, you know? And so I've really been exploring that for myself. It's like, because nobody ever taught me what healthy boundaries were. And so, you know, I created a whole bunch of strategies that suck, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you know what I'm just kind of is occurring to me now is, so in my work as a sex and relationship coach, I get it. Most of my clients are men, or have been men, at least in the last year and a half. And I've noticed a thing that people do, in this case happens to be men. They'll step up and have a query about us potentially working together, and like, what does it look like, kind of thing, and how could it help them? And what I was seeing was two themes. One thing I was seeing often was men sharing some pieces around the harm they fear they may have done and or could do, so avoiding it, or, you know. And then the other thing I was seeing was, or hearing a lot of, was just the men, when they were registering, that they were kind of living in their head and not their body, and they knew it was a disconnect and numbness and just and missing. And what I've noticed is in my own, and the reason I brought this up was because I imagine your is going to help even more men, because your capacity to be with it all grows, right? Because what I've noticed is that when men come to me around this sort of disconnect numbness thing, that's in my comfort zone now. Like I feel I'm easy to be with that. Yeah. But when men are coming in, what feels to me, this is my experience, so it points to a gap or a place of growth for me, is aggressive, wanting to take, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but in that case, it feels aggressive, and are talking about the harm doing. My heart wants to help them, and I can feel my own fear kick up, and they come in query and walk. They come in query and disappear. And at first, I was like, I kind of going to a little bit of a men don't really want to do the work judging, right? I was judging that, and then I was like, oh wait a minute. There's also a very good chance, and quite likely, that they're picking up on my visceral response to what they're telling me. And even though I'm doing everything I can to be present and to be witness, and yes, I actually am willing to hear it, it scares me still. So my guess is there's almost like a check-in is, can you be with me in my shit?
Yeah.
Oh no, they have a gut response that maybe I can't, and so they, hopefully carry on looking for someone who can. I hope, because I always, strive to do that if people are willing to let me resource them with somebody else. But yeah, it's interesting. So you continuing to, like you said, boundaries right now will then just allow you to have more capacity to work with men on a increasingly, I don't know, greater different levels. Yeah.
And I think you finding your boundaries within your work to work with men that are talking about aggression is also a really great thing. Like one of the best things you can do for, I think, men in that regard is like having healthy boundaries, right? And it's like, so like through your work, through the body work, and then coaching them through things, it's like a lot of the times people are gonna have not healthy boundaries. And so it's like this learning place, right? And as people who are like in leadership positions around this work, I think that we can really benefit the people that we support by actually kind of expressing and showing those healthy boundaries, and speaking to them. And so, I think that would be really hard to work with men who cause harm, right? Or who want to talk about that. It's like an edge, culturally an edge that most people aren't even that comfortable with, right? And so, it's a tough one, and but it's also really important, because my experience too is that when men start to build rapport and regulation, that those stories start to come out, right? And it is, I operate from the place that we're all perpetrators, and that we are all survivors of violence, all people, all perpetrators, all survivors, and men are, and in the context of patriarchy, we also cause a lot of harm through those systems. But then there's like all kinds of other ways in which people cause harm, right? And so
well, and sorry, when I said yes and agree with you, I was thinking men and women, because we have our own stories of that too, right?
Yeah. No, I'm more like saying this because I like to state that as a part of my work, a part of my approach isn't that isn't like all men cause harm. I'm like, all people cause harm. We all need to deal with this shit. So something that you made me think of though was like the men that are coming that are having a hard time kind of feeling or connecting. There's a thing called alexithymia, and I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
What is it called?
Alexithymia.
I don't think I
would look that up, and that is like the inability to know what you are feeling and expressing.
Oh, yes.
And a huge percentage of men struggle with this. So it's like, I also really struggled with this when I was younger. I don't think I really struggle with it that much now, but it used to come as like kind of like a cloud in my head, and I was like, I don't know what I feel, because mostly I just felt overwhelmed, right? And confused, because I had so much stuff going on inside of me that had never been talked about, spoken to, that it was just nuts, right? So yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff written about it.
Yeah, I think now that you're talking about it, I think I've heard the term. It's kind of more of a psychological term, right?
Yeah, from the counseling world.
I know of it. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm sure it is common. Yes.
Yeah, it's a useful one to be aware of if you're working with men. It's like really helpful, because I know I've definitely come into a lot of men who are struggling with that. So yeah. And I, from talking to other like folks that are working in the kind of sex bod realm, it sounds that experience that you kind of parlayed with having the men come in and kind of talk about violence and power is actually, I think, a fairly common one, because men are looking for neutral like places to go, or places that they can go and talk about these things. And so we need spaces to talk about the harm that we cause.
Yes.
Like that's just, and there isn't really a lot of spaces to do that, right? And it's unfortunate, and I would love to see our capacity as a culture to build on that. So yeah, my friend Victor Salmon does work around that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. He's got a really great website with a lot of resources for people that have caused harm.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
And it's good. The more people like you're speaking to it, and I might actually, when I share this conversation, like actually share some of the names and their referrals, just so people can go look them up if they want.
I can send you some links and stuff.
Yeah, and you know, and there's the harm doing. And the other conversation I had come up fairly often too, and they weren't always people who went through and worked with me, but queried, were wanting like a deep dissatisfaction around their sexual relations. Like it wasn't working for them. They wanted so much more than what was happening, and they felt like they felt like they were very much in the status quo. Their wording was more along, how do I become a really incredible lover, whatever that meant to them. But part of what I heard in that was just the dissatisfaction with how we've learned to do sex in our culture too. That's a fairly common one as well that I've heard men talk about.
And we often talk about how women are getting ripped off. We rarely talk about how men are getting ripped off. And I'm like, it actually drives me nuts sometimes. I'm like, because in the context of our culture, we think that what men are getting is awesome. We're like, oh, it's great. Yeah, you ejaculated. That's fantastic.
You had an orgasm, so you're good, right?
Yeah. Woohoo! And it's like, well, you know, there's a real big difference in like quality and like connection and like all of these nuances that you don't get, you know, from the pop culture, right? So yeah. It's,
well, and even just the pleasure possibilities, like our culturally, we tend to be very genitally focused in our sex, and it's like that's like just the percentage of what's available in our bodies to feel good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're largely talking about men, my experience is that gender has also shaped the way we interact with men's bodies. And so I'm a pretty sensual man. And I am sometimes like, holy crap, you are treating my body right now like a man's man kind of body. And I'm like, I want you to be like I want you to treat this thing like it is like a sensual organ, right, like the entire thing. And it is really hard, like for usually women, not always, but usually women, to actually start interacting with my body in a sensual way when I'm having intimacy with them. It can be really challenging. And it again, it's those like gendered lenses, right? And it's like we have these patterns.
This is how to do sex with a man, and there's assumptions that every male body's the same, that you guys are only going to want this little,
it's like all they want is the 7-minute porn video, right? And it's and you know, and vice versa. There's ways in which that men do these things to women, right? Or women and men and men. You know, it's like so it's like there's a lot of undoing in there that has to happen, right? So there's a lot of doing and undoing.
That's correct. Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, because I even think about like so there's our lifelong learning, right? And then there's what we kind of choose to learn and experiment and maybe grow and understand. But I also even notice, like with a new partner, everything that they know and learn from their last one is immediately shows up, and you're just like, okay, none of that is me. Sometimes you're like, thank you, but you know, none of that is in my interest. And it's just brought in immediately, right, to the interaction. I mean, it's normal, it's nothing wrong with it, but sometimes it's just really, especially with what a person brings to you is not within what you prefer. It's just such an obvious example of they literally just brought what they learned, like, to me. And it may or may not line up, right, at all. Yeah.
Have you seen?
And I'm sure women do the same, right? I guarantee it goes both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, totally. Have you seen the, oh man, what's it called? It's called the Auto Straddle. It's like this guide that you can like print out, and you can like sit down with someone and you can like write out like the different things that you want from each other. I did it with I was dating someone once. It was awesome. It was super cool. I'm gonna pull that up again. I haven't thought about it for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can download it online. It's pretty cool. It's like it like allows you to like kind of get that out right away. I'm like kind of like on the table. Like I try and just get that out there now and talk about it. Like here's the things that I like, and here's what I'd like to explore, and here's where I'd like to go. I don't need it all right now, but
just so you know, yeah, nice.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then it's like, I mean, I guess if you're not doing monogamy, you can also like, you can find other ways to have those things met, right? So
that's right, because you can have different relationships meeting those needs,
and different kinds of relationships.
Yeah.
So yeah. Pretty,
so you know what sorry, go ahead.
No.
Two things have gotten really clear to me in this conversation, other than thank you so much for sharing everything you've shared.
Yeah.
I feel like if you and I were going to do 2 more of these, the one topic that would be really fun would be monogamy, and the other one would just be sexuality. I feel like we could talk easily an hour about both those things.
Absolutely.
So I'm just putting that up there as like maybe in the future.
Well, we could do that in the future again. Yeah, absolutely.
It just feels like a very easy, comfortable conversation, and I feel like could be a very natural exchange of experiences, both personal and professional, and like ideas for
totally,
that people might find really interesting.
Yeah, and the monogamy piece to me just actually intersects into relationship and understanding that all relationships are different, and that and it comes into boundaries as well. We are always negotiating boundaries, right?
Yes.
So when we start to understand that, even in monogamy, if you're not negotiating boundaries in monogamy, it's going to cause some serious problems, because there's like these ideas that we all think that monogamy is this very particular way, and it's not, right? It's like you're either making agreements consciously or you're not, right? So it gets messy.
Yeah.
Or it gets awesome if you're making conscious decisions about it. So
yeah. Well, I think it is
definitely go down that road.
Yeah, and that's like a whole other conversation piece. So I'm just
really
going to leave that right there, because we could go off on it right now. I just feel like I'm just aware of time too, just maybe coming to kind of a natural pause in that conversation. And thank you. You actually did touch on all the stuff I was also curious about. So thanks for that. And I just want to thank you very much for your time and for your very open sharing of your experiences and what you're doing out in the world. As we close, is there anything specific you want people to know around your work, or how you can support them, or how to reach you, or anything in that realm? Feel free to.
Yeah, so they can reach me. Maybe what I'll do is I'll send you my contact information.
Yep, and I
don't know if you're going to do fancy screen stuff. You could always flash it.
I don't know if I know how, but I could try just for fun.
So people can phone me. They can look me up on Facebook. My last name is Davyduik, and then my first name is it's just going to make it confusing. Just look up Davyduik, and then Toolbox Consulting and Wellness.
And I can definitely post your contact information. Like when I post this, I'll make sure your stuff is in writing, like in terms of contact.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm working on a website. I'm more of like a kind of a word of mouth person, but I'm trying to be technologically, on par with where most humans are. And so maybe I'll get that into you, although it's still kind of like being tweaked. I do group work in Victoria. I'm obviously looking at doing it online now because of the whole COVID-19. I was going to do that anyways, but I wasn't expecting to do it this soon. So I do drop-in men's groups. I do a 6-week course called Toolkit for Relationship and Friendship. And then I do another 6-week course that is like really, really honing the skills, and that ideally helps that men walk away with their own men's group that they can that can support them.
Wonderful.
Yeah, because for me the whole idea is like, I don't want to be reliant on like, counselors, therapists, and coaches. I want them to be like supercharging my experience, right? And so if I have my
Yes.
baseline stuff covered, then my coaches and my counselors and my doctors, they can just like help me supercharge that experience, right? So that's kind of for me, it's about giving men the baseline, getting them to have agency and supporting themselves at a baseline, you know, good mental health. So,
Yeah, beautiful.
yeah, and then I also do some work with the Men's Therapy Center, which was formerly called the Men's Trauma Center. So if folks want to like connect into counseling around trauma, they can connect with me.
Okay, you're still connected with them. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So cool.
yeah, and I'm working on bringing an Indigenous men's group out called the Dudes Club to the South Island, and that's a collaboration between several organizations out at Stay Out and the Men's Therapy Center, and then the Dudes Club. So, yeah, so if anyone's interested in any of those things, they can shoot me a line. Yeah, and then I do one-on-one, so people can call me and talk to me about their problem.
Awesome.
I will support them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, and their dreams, yes. And like I said, I'll put some of this in writing when I share it on the different social media, so people have a, you know, don't have to actually remember everything you just said. At least the contact information. Thank you. This was a pleasure for me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks
Yeah, me
so
too.
much.
Yeah, I always enjoy our combos. I'm really stoked that we did this. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much.
Yay. Bye.
Bye.